Welcome everyone to the DC Cybersecurity Professionals Virtual Meetup. Today we have a really great presentation by Blake Regan titled Working Hard, You Deserve a Raise. So I'll keep it quick. With that being said, I am Tyrone Wilson and Blake, let's go. You have the floor.
All right, just doing a quick time check here. All right. So welcome to my talk. This is Working Hard, You Deserve a Raise. My name is Blake Regan, and I am a senior security analyst. Who am I? I'm a father and husband. I started in IT in 2020, formerly worked in the construction industry. My father was a home builder, so out of high school, I went right into the trades. But I started in information security in 2014. I'm a hockey fanatic, fan and player. I'm an automation enthusiast. I do a lot of PowerShell automation, which I really enjoy and has really kind of made a difference for myself and also my organization. And so that's kind of why I want to share some of these things with you today to help you get started, or maybe if you already use PowerShell, learn some new tricks. And also I'm a serial learner, attending talks just like this on a topic that I'm interested in. I think it's really important to individuals, no matter what industry you're in, to just continuously stay learning, stay curious about things, learn from others, and eventually you'll grow and have those skills that you want to have. Employment and education. I'm a senior security analyst at Wesco Distribution. I previously worked at Motorola Solutions in the government and public safety information assurance vetting lab. And then I have a bachelor's in information security and a couple of certifications that I obtained as part of being a serial learner. So our discussion today, we're going to talk about what is an array. Now, an array isn't just exclusive to PowerShell, but we're going to be talking about arrays as they relate to PowerShell. We're going to talk about creating an array, adding to an array, and indexing data in arrays. Now, if you're new to programming or scripting languages, this may not make sense to you right now, but hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have a better understanding, and the slides that I presented can be used to practice these exercises after this presentation and help you learn and reinforce those concepts. We're also going to talk about exporting and importing data with arrays. We'll get more into that in the exercises later. And then processing data in an array to take an action. So that's really where the automation piece comes in, is you have a large set of data, whether it's from Active Directory, whether it's from running processes on a host that you're investigating. All these things can be placed into an array, and we'll talk about what that is. And by analyzing that data, we can make decisions based on meeting a certain condition. That's really where the magic of automation comes in. You can follow along if you like during this presentation. I encourage it, and as I mentioned, these slides, you can use them later. I kind of created this in a way that you have to have a Windows computer, or you can have Linux with PowerShell core, PowerShell, and a keyboard. And there's no special Active Directory environment or anything else that you need to set up. So that kind of makes it accessible to a lot of people. A disclaimer here. The PowerShell scripts that I referenced in these slides, I have written these. I have put some of these on GitHub, and the content that's in here are on the slides. Please make sure that you always check code and understand what it's doing in a test environment before running in production, especially reviewing code, making sure that there's no malicious things out there. Just because it's on GitHub does not mean that it's safe. So please just kind of take that into mind. So let's talk about what is an array. So array is a definition, if you Google it, is a list or collection of objects or variables stored in memory. And there's no fixed length or size parameters on arrays. Arrays can be a collection of strings, can be a collection of integers, it can be a collection of objects, which we'll see later. Each object can have a property, and that's really, with PowerShell, that's really where that power comes in, because you can collect objects that have many different properties, and by housing them in an array with a structured format, you can then manipulate or evaluate that data. A single item in an array is referred to as an element or elements of an array. In PowerShell, there's a couple different ways to signify something for a variable is an array. One of the basic ones that I use often is just creating that $ array. That's a variable, the string there, array, equals the ampersand in parentheses. That tells the PowerShell interpreter that this variable is going to be an array. If you don't use this, you'll see in the next couple slides, it doesn't matter, but that's just kind of a way to signify it in documentation. Arrays are a very powerful way to organize and process data sets. So what is an array? We're going to talk about creating an array. So as I mentioned, I'm a hockey fan, and I know that we have folks from the DC area, so we're going to talk about the Blackhawks and the Capitals. So here I've created an array, and this is where you can be following along. You'll create an array called Stanley Cups, right? And where you're going to use a combination of strings and integers. So here we have a string, which is a word or letters with the parentheses. We have our integer, another string. So these each are elements of this Stanley Cups array. Now in PowerShell, after you've created an array or a variable, if you just call that variable by typing it, and take a step back. If you're new to PowerShell, this PS and greater than sign is a representation of what you may see on the command line, PowerShell prompt. So if you're following along in PowerShell, you can just literally type this text here, and this will be for many of these examples going forward, okay? So as we see, when we call this array that we created, we can see that the elements are Blackhawks, that's one of our strings. We have the number 6. Blackhawks have 6 Stanley Cups total. Capitals have 1. So when we call count, this is getting into objects properties. We've created this array here. Now if we do this dot count, this is saying, tell me how many elements are in this array, or how many objects are in this array. The result should be 4. So if you're following along and you do $Stanley Cups dot count, you should get the number 4. And if everybody's got that, I think we can move forward. So let's take it a step further. We're going to create a second array, President's Trophies. So we'll follow along the same theme. We're adding the elements here. And by using this parenthesis, we're now making this collection of elements into our array. So again, after we create it, we call the array. We see we have Blackhawks 2, Capitals 3. And if we do President's Trophies dot count, we should see 4 again. Okay. So now let's say we want to add something to an array. By using the plus equals operator, we can add or append data into an existing array. So you can do this there's many different ways to do this. But I want to demonstrate a couple different ones to help you understand. So we previously created our Stanley Cups array, but we want to add another teams to the elements into this array. So we'll use plus equals Bruins and the number 6. So if we're following along, we've now added these elements into the array, and if we call that array again, we will now see Blackhawks 6, Capitals 1, Bruins 6. Okay, and as I mentioned, there's many different ways to add elements to an array. So I put a different way down here. You can just create another variable array and then do President's Trophies plus Bruins there. So we'll get to that. There's President's Trophies is next. So indexing into arrays. Arrays are indexed using a zero-based number scale. So what does that mean? Number one is really 0. And I think the best way to represent that is this statement right here, that if you have 6 elements in the array, the first one is referenced as element 0, and the last one would be referenced as element 5. Now, we see the example here. If we properly added those elements to your Stanley Cup array, and we do the count method, we see that there's 6 elements in this array now. So if you're indexing that first element by doing Stanley Cup, you're calling your variable that you stored your array in, and then using the index of 0, which is the first element. It should result in saying Blackhawks. If you were to use Stanley Cups and call the second element, it should say Capitals. So this is indexing, and this is behind the scenes a way to index to precisely, or I'll even say surgically, target data within an array. So let's take this a step further. And I think before we do that, are there any questions before we keep going on here? Okay, it looks like there's no questions. So can you make an array of arrays? Yes, you can. So this is where the concept of the indexing will come into play as well. But we're going to make a new array, and we're going to use our previously created arrays as the elements of that array. So I'd like you to create the trophies variable, and the trophies variable is going to equal Stanley Cups, President's Trophies. You don't need to use quotation marks because you're calling the variables, but you do need to use a comma, which most arrays are comma delimited format when you're creating them. So if we were to call, after you create the trophies array and then you call the trophies array, we should see in order the elements that we put in Stanley Cups and President's Trophies listed on the screen. Exporting and importing data with arrays. In PowerShell, there's commandlets import CSV and export CSV. These allow you to either archive these collections or arrays offline for review or later use. A lot of use cases that I have found helpful for exporting things to CSV are related to compliance and retention needs. So keeping a log of data for audit compliance. You can collect variables and objects and export them to a CSV, which can easily be viewed and manipulated in Excel. Auditors love CSV files because they pull them into Excel and then they can do their lookups and their magic. So that's one way to do that. You can also create detailed reports. And then this is a little complicated here for discussion, but I'll just bring it up. You can pass data as pipeline objects with the pipe operator, and we'll do an example of this together in just a moment here. But you can basically create a query or process some information, and at the end you can say pipe it to export CSV, or vice versa. You can do import CSV and then set that to an array. And you'll see this here. And some helpful formats here are HTML, JSON, and CSV for importing and exporting. It's kind of outside the scope of this discussion for HTML and JSON, but with working with Azure and O365, a lot of that data is in the JSON format. So that comes handy if you're working with that type of data set to know how to change it to JSON format, different things like that. So we're going to do a little live demo here, but I wanted to just kind of go over this slide here. So we talked about using the export CSV. So this is going to kind of, we're going to keep building it up. We're going to take it to the next level. So what I'd like you to do on your own workstation is create an array called processes equals get process. So what is this doing? It's running the get process commandlet, and it's taking those, each process on your operating system would be referred to as an object, and each object has properties. So it's taking each of those objects and their properties, and it's storing all that information in the variable processes, which is kind of like, it kind of becomes a database in memory, right? As soon as you type this command and you hit enter, the prompt should return to just a blank prompt. That means it's all in memory. And then if we call it, now these results will vary by system, but if you do processes.count, that number that returns, that is a representation of the active running processes on your operating system, okay? Or elements in that array. So what I would like you to do is, so we're going to use the export CSV commandlet, and we're going to take that processes variable. We're going to use that pipe operator that we talked about. We're going to say pipe those objects to export CSV. And then if you use the /processes CSV, that's just saying put it in the current working directory into a CSV named processes. So I'll give everybody a moment to do that. And while you're doing that, are there any questions right now? Am I going too fast? Hope I'm just building upon these as we go along. I don't see any there. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is set processes equal to null. So what we're going to do is we're now going to clear that database or array from memory. So if we do processes equal null, and then we go call processes again, or processes.count, it should return nothing. All right, and there's a purpose to this you're going to see very shortly. So as we see, processes all gone. That's what my daughter says. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use import CSV. We're going to pull that information back into a variable or back into an array, and then we're going to work with the data in that array. So I'd like you to recreate the processes variable, and then we're going to use import CSV -path, and we're going to call that processes CSV that we recently created. Once you've done that, when you call the processes variable again, you just type you can even just hit up arrow 3 times and then enter processes, however you want to do it. Now you'll see this information represented in a different way. You're going to see this on the screen as organized as an element of the array. Each element represents an object. Each object represents a process. And then of the properties that those processes contain, you're going to see these values here listed, and we're going to work with these values. But that's what you should be seeing on your screen now. So just to recap, we use the get process commandlet to get all the processes on our operating system, and we stored them to a variable. That information gets stored as an array, and then we exported that information to a CSV. We deleted the array from memory, but then we can now with processes, it's a little different. These are just strings right now, but it's an object that has string properties. Now we're recreating it into an array by using that import function. Okay, and so I'm going to switch over to live demo here. Okay, thanks. So I wrote this stuff out ahead of time to kind of get past typos, because you know I don't usually make typos, but when I do, it's when people are watching. So when we're talking about Git processes, I just want to represent this here. So and if you're not familiar with this, what I have open right here is the PowerShell integrated scripting environment. I've heard it called different things. This is deprecated, but this is what I learned PowerShell on. This is what I'm comfortable with. I know there's a VS Code out here, but I felt I'd give you guys a better information by using the ISE. So we talked about Git processes, right? So let's just take a look at the Git process command real quick. Now, this is going to return our information here on, these are each of our processes here, and then each of these are our properties. Okay, this is the default display that you'd see with Git process. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go processes, which we have here, and we're going to say equals. Yeah, told you about those typos. Git process. Okay. So now we've stored that to our array, right? Now when we call this here, when we call our array by just calling this out, we can see that this displays it in the original format that the actual just Git process commandlet returns. So the reason I'm demonstrating this is, let's do our, and again, I'm just doing this because this avoids typos. So we're exporting our array, the elements of our array into a CSV, okay? And then what we're gonna do is I'm now gonna wipe this array out for memory, and then we're gonna import it, basically recreating. So what I wanna do is I wanna show you the difference, how the data looks once we import that back into variable. This is what I was talking about here. We'll let this run through. You can see how the data has changed. So it's no longer, when it was a variable in memory, PowerShell remembered, hey, this is how the output should look, this is the format. Behind the scenes, there's objects, properties, values. So when we export that to our CSV, and let's actually take a look at our CSV real quick, you can see that once we dump this data into a CSV, it's no longer in that very pretty format that we see when we just run Git process. So the purpose of this is just to demonstrate that information that's going on in the background. And when we pull this back into an array by using import CSV, we can now work with this data. Now, processes can change, process IDs can change when you export. So it's really best to work with these at the same time that you're running the system. You know, if you come back after you power off your computer, the numbers will be different. So now we're going to kick it up just a notch. Okay. We're gonna, so right here, we're going to use this is a for each loop. So what this is saying is for each element in the processes array. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. For each element in the processes array, I want you to write the process. Now this is a great, this changed a lot of things for me in PowerShell when I figured out how to do this. So this could say warriors. The name for the element does not matter in relation to the array. For myself, to keep things concise, I name my arrays with plural tense, so that when I'm calling a single item and I'm going back through code, I can follow along. I know that this element represents this array. This is just personal for me, but I think it may be helpful for you. Instead of naming it each, $I in robots. You know, if you go to try to debug your code, $I may be used in many places. So we're going to say here, for each element in the processes array, I want you to display on the screen, that's right host, process.name, and this is where this comes in. Process dot, okay. This dot format here is now saying I want you to index into the properties of the array element. And so if we look at these, now we see all these options in here. Process handles, process name, NPM, PM. I don't remember what these acronyms mean right now. Exit code, exit time, handle, ID has exited. So now when we're talking about doing automation with these arrays, now we can start comparing information. So to give you that example here, what I want you to do on the slides is find the slide. We're probably a couple slides forward where it shows the for each process and processes, right host, process name, path, and ID. Okay, this code's commented out. We're going to get to it in a second, but when we run this, now what I want to show you is we're going to say for each element in the array, I want you to write the process name, the process path, and the ID. And so we're going to say yes, we want to save. This should, oh, there it goes. Sorry, was catching up there. So this for loop, this for each loop, went through each element and it grabbed the information from each element in our array and then it displayed it on the screen. So how can we take that a step further and use this for automation? So what we can do is, and I'm gonna just comment this out here, and then we're gonna uncomment this. So let's go ahead and let's do a little threat hunting. Let's say I want to find process with paths that are null. There's no path to the binary that started this process. So how would we do that? Well, now we can use logic to say if process path is like null or empty or no value, we're using these comparator operatives, then do an action. So the action that we're going to do, and I always use right host. Before, this is how I write my scripts. I get the information right first and then I take the action. But I use right host here. It just bumps an extra line, as you see here. It just bumps an extra line in between the output for each element, and it just keeps it clean on the screen. It's just a personal thing, but maybe it'll be helpful for you. So now we're going to say right host process.name has no path. So let's go ahead and run this. If you're doing this on your screen, you don't have to comment this out here, but you do want to add the if, and then this is a condition. You're saying if this condition is true, so if the process path is null, then go ahead and write this to the screen. The process's name and has no path. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Now you see me highlighting things in here and then using this is run selection. This lets you run just a snippet of code and not the entire script. So that's why I'm doing that. If anybody was curious, may be helpful to you. So let's go ahead and we're going to run that selection. So from the processes that we're running, by using our comparator here, we were able to determine that these following process names have no path for the service binary, or process beginning path. Okay, so then this is just using strings here. This didn't take any action, but now let's take it a step further. So we're talking about threat hunting. Well, I used the term threat hunting for our examples. So maybe this is something that you can do. And let's go ahead and comment this out. If you want to leave this section here, all it will do is print it out on the screen, make the script take just a moment longer to run. But now what we want to do is, I want you to go ahead and now you'll need to run this as administrator because we're gonna kill some processes, but we're gonna create the processes that we're killing. So we are gonna do, WMIC, what is it, call create CMD. Okay, it's WMIC create call, sorry. WMIC process, sorry, process call. I am definitely suffering the wrath of the demo gods right now, and that's okay. All right, so what we did was we called the process CMD. We created a CMD window, or process, sorry. Here's another trick in PowerShell. When you get errors and you have this cursor blinking over here, if you hit the escape button twice, it'll bring your cursor back down to the prompt. I did not know that for a long time, so I did many mouse clicks to go back to the prompt. So I hope that saves you time. Just a little aside here about the native command error. PowerShell ISE does not like to process native commands like CMD, WMIC in here. So it'll get the error, but it will do the action. So let's do this. Let's create a couple of these CMD processes because we want to have some results for our script. So just go ahead and create 4 of these, okay? And then leave the windows open, just minimize them, okay? And so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at this little snippet of code and we're gonna say, what it's saying is the condition is, if the process name is like CMD, if that's true, do this action within here, okay? So we're gonna do our write host to get our clean line. Now, before running this, if you have anything open in CMD other than the processes that we create, I recommend that you either save that work or close that, because once you run this command here in this loop, what's going to happen is it's going to find every process with the name like CMD, which is why we created those processes, and then it's going to kill that process calling. It's using the task kill force process ID. Don't do that. And then it's calling the process.id property of each element in our array. Okay, so now again, this loop is going to run and process everything, and then we're going to put a message on the screen saying this process ID was ended because it matched our condition or our name. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and run this snippet of code here, and you can follow along here and run this. And I'm just going to move the screen up a little more so we can see. We're going to go ahead and run that. Let's see here. Let's see, why is that? Its name CFD. And running. Save. Let's see here. I'm not sure why this failed on me here. Okay. For each process and processes. There we go. I'm not sure why that blanked out on me there. So as we can see here, the action that we said to follow was followed, right? And we'll notice that those CMD windows are no longer there. And even if we just go and manually go to get process, we're gonna return those values. We'll see here that there's no CMD processes running. So that's how you can use, so that's So hopefully I demonstrated how we can link creating an array of the values or information that you want. Now, we created arrays with 4, 6, 20 elements. If you're working in Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, you may have thousands of objects, right? So now when we're using this automation to process or evaluate and then take actions based upon that, now we're really letting the power of the code, do the work for us. We're getting consistent results. We're being efficient. We can share code with others. It really is a powerful way to manage data. Let me take back to the presentation slides here. There was one trick I wanted to show you here. Yes, not trick, but this is just a different way to look at data. So let's do the get process. I know we're getting get process. And let's do, I want you to use that pipe and out to grid view. Okay, and you can use tab completion in PowerShell. It is your friend. Tab completion can also get you into trouble. There's many different commandlets that have the same starting. You may not end up with the commandlet that you want, but that's just the fun of it, right? So now let's go get process out to grid view, okay? This is not specific to arrays, but now you can see this kind of in a graphical format, and you can even search in here. You can do different criteria looking at all these properties, right? We talked about that, using that dot, using that process dot, calling those properties, right? Now, if you look at that outside of a loop and we go handles, right? This is just showing us different handles. This right here is the last, if you run it through a loop and you're calling the element, it's going to give you the information from the last element run. That's just a trick there to think about. So let's talk about this get process. Let's do our WMIC process. Let's just do this because the demo gods, I have not been favorable. So now if we do our process out to grid view, what I wanted to show you was now you can add criteria and you can say, okay, let's look for process name. And then you can put in a value in here. So now you can take that large set of data, or maybe if you're new to writing queries, but you know what you're looking for, you can do a quick, and this grid view is built into, I think it's .NET 3.5 and above. So you can use this on different hosts to kind of query data, not just for processes. You can look for other things, look for files, and then you can use this to search, right? Filter. This is something that's helpful, and you can also save this later on, or you can import. You can do your import CSV / processes CSV. That's that CSV that we created earlier, and then we're going to say pipe to out grid view. Bam! All that data. It takes a little bit to render, but now you can see. So the difference I wanted to show you there was, let's do this here. If I'm just taking the commandlet and piping it to out grid view, this is what we talked about. This is this default information display. These are the default properties that are shown. Microsoft says, hey, this is what I think you're asking for, okay? But if you take and you, as we said, we exported that array with all the properties into a CSV, and if we pull in that CSV, now you can see all the properties and their values in a much easier way to view, right? And look at how much more information we have in this format than we do in the other, right? So that's really where to try to process this or search through manually, I mean, we used to do that, but we've evolved, right? So I hope that that was very helpful. And just going back to the slides here to catch up. So we covered most of these slides that I'm just cycling through here. And here you go. If you got this result here, then you did the lab exercise, not lab, but the exercise correctly, right? And now you can take and build upon this for doing other things. It's not just killing processes. Maybe it's searching for a file or a file hash. You can do, is it get hash? Yeah, get file hash. And let's just call our processes CSV. Just use this as an example. PowerShell taking the default algorithm is SHA-256. So now let's say you're doing some threat hunting or incident response, and you know you have a file hash and you want to find it quickly, right? You can hash that file. You can feed that value into, you know, copy this here. $hash equals string, string, and right. And now if we say, we'll just say here, we'll say if. One off here, so hash. We'll say get file hash process CSV. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna. I know what I want to do, but my mind isn't able to do it right now. So we're gonna abandon that, and let's just go back to our closing thoughts. All right, because I'd like, if people have questions, I'd love to answer questions. And so the closing thoughts here. Learning how to manipulate arrays can really be a game changer. And I hope by demonstrating that difference of the way the data looks when you just run a commandlet in PowerShell versus exporting all that information to a CSV or looking at it in a different way, how much more information is actually really under the hood. It increases our accuracy, right? We're using the automation, we're using operators like greater than, less than, equal to, or even matching with regular expressions, text. Really, the sky is the limit. It reduces our overall effort to accomplish tasks at scale. On-premise Active Directory is, it has a special place in my heart. I know that it's not going to live around forever. And now when we're talking about cloud workloads, Azure, AWS, you know, that information set is getting so much bigger, right? So it's helpful to use these tools to automate it for us. And repeatable results, right? Do you want to go run a script every morning to send people email password expiration reminders? No, we're going to do that with automation. And as I mentioned, sky is the limit, right? It really is your creativity and pushing the limits of PowerShell or a different language. Arrays and lists are around in many different languages. It's ubiquitous, right? We're talking about PowerShell today. So I hope that you really found this helpful and information. Everybody deserves a raise. I try to teach as many people as I can, or coworkers that ask, you know, how do you do this? I take the time to show them, because it really can enable people to reach their full potential by using automation and doing the different things to expand their skill set, right? So I'm really, really grateful that I got an opportunity to talk to everybody today. And I'd like to open up the floor to questions if anybody has any. All right. Well, it doesn't look like there's any questions, unless anybody, Tyrone, if anybody sent you any questions.
No, I haven't seen any. Can you share your your information slide again.
Yeah,
So it's there.
absolutely. Absolutely.
If anyone wants to get in contact with Blake, definitely go and check him out on Twitter and on GitHub. And the video will be posted to the website as well as YouTube. Share it, like, and subscribe. It was a pleasure having you all attend. Blake, of course, it was a pleasure having you present. We definitely love to have you again. It was really, really great and informational, you know? So,
Awesome.
yeah, we're going to close out and we look forward to seeing you all again.